Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been what you'd call a model student. Since elementary school, I maintained a 4.0 GPA, participated in debate club and student government, and even volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends. My brother, on the other hand, was quite the opposite. He'd skip classes, come home smelling like cigarettes, and our parents would constantly find empty beer cans hidden in his room. Despite this stark contrast, my parents never really praised my achievements. It was always, "Why can't you be more social?" or "You should get out more." Meanwhile, they'd spend hours trying to get through to my brother about his behavior. I didn't mind though. I was happy with my choices and knew they'd pay off in the future. One Tuesday afternoon, I came home from debate club practice, looking forward to working on my history project. As soon as I opened the door, I knew something was wrong. The living room was packed with family members. My parents, 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and even my grandmother. They all had these grave expressions on their faces. My mom gently asked me to sit down, saying we needed to talk. When I asked what was going on, my dad solemnly told me they knew what I'd been hiding and they were here because they loved me. My heart started racing. Had something happened to my brother? One of my aunts bluntly stated they had found evidence of my drug use. I nearly laughed out loud. Drug use? Me? The girl who wouldn't even take aspirin without reading the entire label first? When I asked what they were talking about, my mom pulled out a familiar tin from behind her back. My favorite candy tin that I'd kept because of its vintage design. Inside was some leftover white powder from the icing sugar-coated sweets I'd enjoyed months ago. My dad pointed to the tin and told me not to try denying it. I explained that it was just sugar from the candies that came in the tin. My uncle scoffed, saying sugar doesn't look like that. My grandmother pleaded with me to tell the truth, saying they could get me help. Everyone started talking at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and accusations. My brother, who had been lurking in the doorway, was trying not to laugh. My second aunt warned me about throwing away my future, while my other uncle suggested this wasn't the way to deal with stress. I tried explaining about the candies, about how I bought them from that quirky little shop downtown, about how I'd just forgotten to clean the tin. But they weren't listening. Their minds were made up. Declaring how ridiculous this was, I grabbed the tin from my mother's hands, and before anyone could stop me, scraped every bit of that white powder into my mouth with my finger. The room went deadly quiet. Then chaos erupted. My mom screamed to call an ambulance, my dad yelled asking what I'd done, and my grandmother started praying loudly. My brother was now doubled over with silent laughter in the hallway. I turned to my third aunt, who had always been the voice of reason in our family. I begged her to just read the tin, pointing to the text on the side. She took the tin with shaking hands and read the label aloud, revealing it was indeed just icing sugar from vintage sugar drops. She passed it to my uncle, who read it and went pale. The tin made its way around the room, each family member's face growing redder with embarrassment. My brother finally walked in and called them out, asking if they seriously thought his straight-A sister who had never missed a day of school was doing drugs. The same sister who had lectured him for an hour about the dangers of drinking when she caught him with a beer. One by one, my relatives mumbled their apologies and practically ran for the door. My grandmother kept blessing me on her way out. My parents stood there looking like they wanted the floor to swallow them whole. My dad weakly tried to defend their actions, saying they were just worried. I shot back, questioning why they were worried about the daughter who'd never given them any reason to worry, suggesting they focus that energy on the son who actually needed it. I went to my room and shut the door, but not before hearing my brother deliver the final blow. He pointed out that if they'd paid half as much attention to what he was doing as they did to my imaginary drug problem, they might have caught him before he started dealing. My brother had been clean for years by then, but that comment ensured our parents never jumped to conclusions about either of us again. I had just landed a dream contract with a company in Seattle. After months of remote interviews and negotiations, everything was set for me to relocate from Miami. I'd spent weeks organizing the move, and this flight was the final piece of the puzzle. I specifically booked my ticket 3 months in advance to secure a window seat because I suffer from motion sickness, and being able to see the horizon helps me manage it. The flight started normally enough. I boarded early, settled into my assigned seat, 14A, and prepared for the 6-hour journey ahead. I had my noise-canceling headphones, my tablet loaded with movies, and my anti-nausea medication ready to go. Everything was perfect until she showed up. I noticed her immediately, a flight attendant who wasn't part of the crew working this flight. She was wearing a different airline's uniform and was traveling as a passenger. She kept walking up and down the aisle looking at seat numbers and making phone calls. I didn't think much of it until she stopped right next to my row. The off-duty flight attendant approached me and demanded that I move to another seat. When I asked her to explain, she told me that this was her cousin's preferred seat, claiming her cousin had anxiety and needed to sit by the window. She said she had already arranged everything with the crew. I explained to her that I had booked this specific seat because I get motion sick and needed the window seat. She immediately dismissed my concern, insisting that her cousin's anxiety was more important than my motion sickness. She then tried to pull rank, claiming that, as airline staff, she had priority. I stood my ground and pointed out that she wasn't even working this flight and was from a different airline altogether. I told her I wouldn't be moving. That's when things went from bizarre to surreal. She started shouting, drawing attention from other passengers. She threatened me, claiming she could have me removed from the flight and that my behavior was unacceptable. Then she did something I still can't believe. She actually grabbed my arm and tried to pull me out of the seat. I held onto the armrests, completely shocked by her actions. I demanded that she take her hands off me, telling her this was assault. Several passengers around us started recording with their phones, and one of them pressed the call button. A working flight attendant quickly arrived and asked what was happening. The entitled flight attendant immediately claimed I was refusing to accommodate her cousin who had special needs. I countered her lies by showing my boarding pass that proved this was my assigned seat, and I told the working flight attendant about the physical assault. The working flight attendant immediately radioed for backup. Within minutes, airport security was called to the plane. The entitled flight attendant kept insisting she had authority over seating arrangements, but her story quickly fell apart when they checked and found no record of any special accommodation requests for her cousin. When security arrived, they told her she needed to leave the plane. She tried to resist, bragging about her 15 years of flying experience and repeatedly asking if they knew who she was. The security officer wasn't impressed and warned her that she'd be heading to jail if she didn't leave peacefully. They escorted her and her cousin off the plane while passengers applauded. The captain apologized for the delay, and we took off about 30 minutes later than scheduled. But the story doesn't end there. During the flight, several passengers who had recorded the incident shared their videos with me. The working flight attendants were incredibly apologetic and kept checking on me throughout the flight. One of them told me that they had contacted their airline's management about the incident. 2 days after landing in Seattle, I received calls from both airlines involved. The entitled flight attendant had been immediately terminated from her position, and her airline wanted to offer me compensation for the incident. But what really made my day was learning that she was being charged with assault and making false claims of authority. Her cousin didn't even have anxiety. It turned out they just wanted to sit together by the window to take photos for their social media accounts. They had already tried this routine on 2 other flights that week, but those passengers had given in to avoid confrontation. Thanks to all the video evidence and witness statements, she ended up pleading guilty to assault charges and was banned from flying with major airlines in the country. I've been working as a casino dealer for about 5 years now. After getting my business degree and realizing the corporate world wasn't for me, I decided to take a chance and enroll in dealer school. Best decision I ever made. The flexible schedule lets me pursue my side gig as a photographer, and the tips are pretty sweet too. Our casino runs a straightforward system for letting dealers go home. First in, first out. Simple enough, right? If multiple dealers start at the same time, we rotate who gets first dibs on leaving early. 1 week you're first, next week you're second, and so on. It keeps things fair. That's where my story with this entitled co-worker begins. She's been working here for about 3 years, always acting like she owns the place because she's got more real-world responsibilities than the rest of us. You know the type. Uses her kids as an excuse for everything. One afternoon I was pretty excited about my shift. I was first option to leave early, and I had a photography gig lined up after work. I showed up 10 minutes before my scheduled time like usual, only to find that she had already started dealing. The floor supervisor needed someone right away, and since she was hanging around in the employee break room, she jumped at the chance. She started 15 minutes before schedule, even though she was supposed to be third option that day. 6 hours into the shift, we started closing tables. I was ready to head out when I saw her packing up to leave. When I pointed out that I was supposed to be first option that day, she smugly told me that since she started before me, she had first option. "That's just how it works," she said. Her smug smile made my blood boil. I went to talk to the supervisor. When I complained that the rotation had me as first option, the supervisor simply shrugged and said it was policy. First to start, first to leave. She overheard this and couldn't resist rubbing it in, telling me there was nothing I could do about it. That's when I decided to play her game, but better. See, I knew her situation. Every work day, she had to wait for her mom to come over and watch her kids before she could leave for work. She was usually cutting it close to start time. I agreed with her, saying she was absolutely right about policy being policy. The next day, I showed up 2 hours early. I didn't have kids or other obligations holding me back. I just sat in the break room, made sure the supervisor knew I was there, and waited. Like clockwork, they needed an early dealer, and I was right there, ready to go. I kept this up for 3 weeks straight. Every single shift I was first in, first out. No exceptions. I could see it wearing her down, having to stay late every night. One evening, as I was leaving early again, she caught up with me. She complained about how ridiculous the situation was, saying she hadn't been able to get home before midnight in weeks. When I suggested she could come in early if she wanted to leave first, she angrily reminded me that she couldn't do that because of her kids. I simply replied that that sounded like a personal problem. 2 more weeks passed. She complained to every supervisor who would listen. The final straw came when she had to cancel her kids' weekend plans because she was too exhausted from staying late every night. She accused me of doing this on purpose, and I simply asked her if she meant following the policy she was so fond of, the one she had rubbed in my face. Finally, management called a meeting. They announced a new policy. To jump the rotation, you had to be called in more than an hour before your scheduled time. 15 minutes wouldn't cut it anymore. All those late nights, all that exhaustion, just because she couldn't resist being smug about that one 15-minute head start. These days, she doesn't make eye contact with me anymore. She just quietly follows the rotation like everyone else. My photography business took off during all those early hours I spent in the break room. I used the time to edit photos and book new clients. So while she was getting more and more frustrated, I was building my exit strategy. She tried to get her mom to come earlier to watch the kids, but apparently that didn't work out too well. 7 years of project management experience, consistently exceeding targets. And here I am, unemployed right before the holidays. The tech startup I worked for suddenly let me go without any explanation. Just a "we're going in a different direction" speech from human resources. I've graduated with honors, bought my own house in Kansas at 27, built a solid career. Meanwhile, my older sister still lives with our parents at 38, doesn't even drive, and has mom chauffeur her around like a teenager. But somehow I'm the one they worry about. The job hunt was brutal at first. Kansas isn't exactly a tech hub, and local opportunities were scarce. Then 2 weeks after getting laid off, I got an incredible offer from a company in Denver, $83,000 a year, which was $23,000 more than my previous salary. I was ecstatic until I called my parents to share the news. As soon as I mentioned the offer, my mom immediately started fretting about what would happen to my house. When I suggested renting or selling it, my dad jumped in, telling me I was crazy and warning that I'd never be able to buy another home in this market. I tried explaining how Denver had great opportunities in tech, but my mom cut me off, insisting that $83,000 wasn't enough to live on in Denver. Every time I tried to offer a solution, they shot it down. When I mentioned renting out my house, my dad warned me about renters destroying the property and demanded to know where I'd store all my stuff. I barely got a word in about storage units before my mom started complaining about how cold Denver was and how I'd freeze there. The bombardment continued for days. Every call turned into a lecture about how I was making a huge mistake. Then my dad sent me a job posting for an administrative assistant position at the local university. He insisted it was perfect for me because it was stable and close to home. When I pointed out that it paid $15,000 less than my last job and would basically involve photocopying documents and scheduling meetings, he lost his temper. He called me damn stupid for not jumping at the opportunity and questioned who I thought I was. Meanwhile, my sister sits at home every evening watching TV while mom cooks her dinner and nobody says a word about her life choices. Last week, I overheard my mom and sister talking in the kitchen. My mom was offering to pack my sister's lunch for the next day, and my sister asked for her favorite sandwiches. They then discussed what time mom should pick her up from work, as if this was completely normal for a 38-year-old woman. It's maddening. 2 years ago, I turned down an amazing opportunity in Boston because of their pressure. I took a local job with a pay cut instead, and look where that got me. Fired and back at square one. But something snapped in me during our last family dinner. My dad was going on another rant about the Denver job when my sister interrupted him to ask mom to cut her meat for her. That's when I realized I couldn't let this happen again. I announced that I was taking the job in Denver. My dad tried to bring up all their previous arguments, but I cut him off. I told them I was done letting them dictate my life while they enabled my sister to live like a teenager. I explained that I was a professional with years of experience, and I wouldn't waste my potential because they were afraid of change. My mom was outraged at how I was speaking to them, trying to claim they only wanted what was best for me. But I stood my ground. I told them that what was best for me was not living in fear, not taking a massive step backward in my career, and getting out of this golden cage they'd built. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. My sister looked shocked. She'd never seen anyone stand up to our parents before. My dad shouted after me, warning me not to come crawling back when I failed. I turned back just long enough to tell him that I wouldn't fail. And even if I did, I'd rather fail trying than succeed at being miserable. That was 3 months ago. I'm writing this from my new apartment in Denver, with a view of the mountains from my window. The job is everything I hoped for and more. I even got a performance bonus last month. My house in Kansas is rented to a lovely family who actually improved the garden. My parents still aren't speaking to me, but my sister sent me a text last week. She's finally taking driving lessons. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.